Be still for a moment. Before anything else, take a breath. Not because this is entertainment, not because this is motivation, but because something in your spirit recognizes what is about to be spoken. If you are here, it is not random. You did not stumble onto this message by accident. You did not click out of boredom. This message found you at a precise moment, in a precise season, when your soul was finally quiet enough to hear. There has been a strange silence around your life lately. A silence so deep it feels heavy, almost uncomfortable. The phone stopped ringing. Familiar faces disappeared. Support systems quietly dissolved. Conversations that once flowed effortlessly now feel distant or forced. And in that stillness, when the noise of the world faded, you found yourself asking a dangerous, honest question. Why am I so alone? But hear this carefully, because this is where truth replaces illusion. What you interpreted as abandonment was never abandonment at all. It was separation. What you labeled rejection was never rejection. It was protection. And what those who opposed you believed was your downfall has become the exact moment karma located them. They never saw this coming. While they laughed at your quietness, mistaking silence for weakness. While they spoke your name in rooms you never entered, assuming their words had power over your destiny. While they planned in shadows, convinced you were finished, forgotten, or fading. The universe was watching. God was measuring. Every action, every intention, and every hidden motive was being weighed. And justice was not rushed, not emotional, and not impulsive. It was being prepared slowly, precisely, and without error. This is not about revenge. Revenge requires emotion. This is alignment. Alignment happens when truth corrects imbalance, when roles are reversed, without you lifting a finger, and when outcomes shift, not because you fought harder, but because you stayed true. This season of isolation was not punishment. It was refinement. You were removed so you could not be contaminated. You were silenced so you could hear. You were hidden so you could be preserved. And now, things are beginning to move. If this message resonates with you, pause right now and comment, I am chosen. Not for validation, not for attention, but as a declaration. Then, like this video, not for me, but as a signal of agreement with truth. And subscribe, because what is unfolding in your life requires clarity, not confusion. Now, let's dive deeper. Point 1. The divine reason you were separated before karma moved. If you are listening carefully, you may notice that your loneliness did not arrive gradually. It arrived like a door closing behind you without warning. One season, you were surrounded by voices, obligations, familiar laughter, and the constant pull of other people's expectations. And then suddenly you found yourself alone with your thoughts, your prayers, and the steady, almost unsettling hum of your own awareness. This was not a social collapse, not rejection, not failure, and not a sign that something was wrong with you. This was spiritual architecture unfolding with precision. Separation always comes before recalibration, because nothing can be realigned while it is still tangled. When a chosen one is about to move into a higher alignment, the environment must be stripped of emotional noise, distraction, and interference. People who once felt natural began to feel heavy in your presence. Conversations that once flowed easily started to drain you. You noticed subtle discomforts you used to ignore. You felt exhausted after interactions that once energized you. And instead of fighting to preserve those connections out of habit, your soul quietly chose stillness. That stillness was not emptiness. It was containment. It was the pause before a shift, the silence before a recalibration. and the holding chamber where your energy could stabilize without being pulled in multiple directions. Divine protection often disguises itself as loss, because the human mind associates safety with company and danger with solitude. But spiritually, presence without alignment is not safety. It is exposure. It is vulnerability to manipulation, delay, and misdirection. You were not removed because you were weak, fragile, or incapable of maintaining relationships. You were removed because you were becoming incompatible with the intentions, frequencies, and unresolved karma around you. This is why the loneliness felt confusing rather than dramatic. There was no obvious betrayal, no clear villain, and no single event you could point to and explain. You did nothing wrong, yet everything changed. That confusion was intentional. Karma cannot operate in crowded emotional environments where energies overlap and responsibilities blur. Justice requires clarity. Correction requires clean lines. Before balance can be restored externally, space must be created internally. So before karma touched those who wronged you, it first cleared you from their reach. It moved you out of the line of fire, out of shared emotional contracts, and out of the energetic proximity that would have entangled you in consequences not meant for you. Your isolation was not punishment, it was insulation. It was the universe quietly saying, "Stay here, remain still, do not interfere, do not chase, and do not explain yourself." What is being prepared does not require your effort, only your alignment. And in that silence, while you questioned your worth and replayed memories, something far more precise was happening. Your energy was being refined, your awareness sharpened, and your role repositioned, so that when justice moved, it would move cleanly, accurately, and without touching you at all. Point 2. Why loneliness is the shield that stops premature attacks. There are phases in a chosen one's life where visibility would have been fatal to growth, moments when being seen too early would have distorted what was still forming. Because had you remained accessible, your energy would have continued to be siphoned in subtle ways, drained through expectations, emotional labor, unspoken obligations. And had you remained emotionally open, manipulation would have continued quietly, disguised as concern, curiosity, or familiarity. So the universe did something precise and intentional, something surgical rather than dramatic. It isolated you, not as a punishment but as a controlled environment, because isolation is not abandonment, it is concealment, a deliberate withdrawal from interference while your inner structure recalibrated. During this phase, you were being protected while your frequency stabilized, and that protection did not arrive as comfort. It arrived as silence, distance, unanswered calls, fading connections, and the sudden collapse of dynamics that once felt permanent. You may have noticed that during this time your reactions slowed, where once you would have rushed to explain, defend, or clarify. You now paused, you observed, you felt no urgency to correct misunderstandings or rescue narratives. You stopped explaining yourself, not because you became cold, but because you became clear. You stopped chasing clarity from people who thrived in confusion, people who benefited when you were emotionally accessible and mentally overextended. This was not emotional shutdown. It was emotional sovereignty forming, a recalibration where your nervous system learned that not every signal requires a response and not every invitation deserves entry. When the shield activates, people who once had access suddenly feel blocked. Not because you announce boundaries, but because your energy no longer leaks. Messages go unanswered, not out of spite, but out of alignment. Opportunities disappear because they were never meant to survive your next level. Dynamics collapse without confrontation. because your silence removes the fuel they relied on. And while this felt lonely to you, it felt threatening to them, because when access is removed, control collapses. When you're no longer emotionally predictable, manipulation loses its grip. Karma does not begin with punishment. It begins with the removal of leverage, with the quiet closing of doors that others assumed would always remain open. During this period, you were not falling behind. You were being repositioned, stripped of distractions, false roles, and emotional debts. You never agreed to, consciously. The loneliness you felt was not evidence of loss, but evidence of detox. The empty space was necessary for recalibration, because growth at this level requires silence, anonymity, and containment. Seeds do not sprout in crowds, and the universe will always protect what it intends to elevate by first removing it from harm. What looked like stagnation was incubation. What felt like rejection was filtration. And what you interpreted as isolation was the universe saying, not yet, not here, not with them, because once your frequency stabilized, once emotional sovereignty locked in, access would return selectively, consciously, on your terms. But by then you would no longer confuse attention with connection or proximity with loyalty. You would understand that concealment was the mercy that kept you intact until you were strong enough to be seen without being consumed. Point 3. The psychological blind spot that made your enemies underestimate you. Your enemies miscalculated because they judged you through projection, and projection is always blind to truth. They measured you using their own limits, their own fears, and their own habits of collapse. They assumed your silence meant defeat, because silence, to them, is what happens after surrender. They assumed your withdrawal meant fear, because they only step back when they are cornered, exposed, or losing control. What they never considered is that silence can be discipline, and withdrawal can be strategy. They could not perceive inner alignment because they live externally, reacting to noise, validation, and visible outcomes. They mistake stillness for weakness because they have never built anything from the inside out. While you were quiet, they became careless. While you were reflective, they stayed reactive. While you were observing patterns, they were repeating them. And in that unseen space between restraint and recklessness, karma began arranging consequences without announcing itself. This is how imbalance corrects itself, not through confrontation, not through explanation, but through timing. The most dangerous misunderstanding an adversary can have is believing they have already won. That belief breeds arrogance. It creates shortcuts. It dulls intuition. It makes people ignore subtle warnings because they think the outcome is already decided. They stop listening. They stop sensing. They stop adjusting. Meanwhile, you were not frozen. You were stabilizing. Your inner structure was strengthening quietly, without performance. Your emotional independence was locking in, layer by layer, until their behavior no longer had access to your nervous system. And once that happens, karma no longer needs your participation. You don't have to defend yourself, prove anything, or push back. The universe does not require noise to correct imbalance. It only requires clarity. Your restraint denied them friction, and without friction, their actions had nowhere to discharge except back onto themselves. They mistook your composure for passivity, but composure is pressure mastered. They mistook your patience for delay, but patience is timing refined. They never saw the shift, because shifts that matter happen internally first. By the time outcomes appear externally, the verdict has already been written. Their downfall began the moment they underestimated the power of someone who no longer reacts. When you stopped needing acknowledgement, when you stopped needing justice on your schedule, and when you stopped needing closure from them, The equation changed. Karma does not rush, it aligns. And alignment always favors the one who is grounded, regulated, and self-contained. What looks like stillness from the outside is often preparation at the deepest level. They thought nothing was happening because nothing was loud. But silence is where structures form that cannot be shaken. And now, without your effort, without your interference, and without your explanation, consequences are unfolding naturally, precisely because you stepped out of the way. Point 4. How karma operates quietly instead of dramatically. Karma rarely arrives as spectacle. It does not announce itself with noise or public collapse. It arrives as erosion, quiet, persistent, unavoidable. At first, nothing looks wrong from the outside. Life appears intact. But internally, something begins to loosen. Confidence that once felt sharp turns dull. Decisions that once flowed with certainty now require hesitation. Momentum stalls for no clear reason. Small delays appear where progress used to be effortless, and those delays compound. Relationships begin to fracture, not through dramatic conflict, but through subtle misalignment. Conversations feel off. Trust weakens. People pull away without explanation. What once worked no longer produces the same results. The same clarity they once used to manipulate situations, control outcomes, or dominate narratives begins to fail them, and that loss of precision is deeply unsettling. This is where most people misunderstand karma. They expect instant reversal, public exposure, or visible downfall. But divine justice is not designed for spectacle. It is designed for inevitability. Karma is not about punishment. It is about balance. The weight they placed on you, the emotional burden, the psychological pressure, the hidden hostility, slowly transfers back into their own lives. Not all at once, but piece by piece. Their sleep becomes restless. Nights are filled with half-conscious worry and unresolved tension. Their mind no longer shuts off cleanly. Decisions lose accuracy. What once felt instinctive now feels forced. Emotional regulation weakens. Small frustrations provoke disproportionate reactions. Irritation surfaces without cause. Anxiety becomes familiar. And the most unsettling part is that no external enemy appears. There is no clear person to blame, no obvious threat to fight. The discomfort seems to come from within, which makes it impossible to escape. This is why karma feels invisible to observers, but unbearable to the one experiencing it. From the outside, everything looks normal. Inside, there is quiet disintegration. You were spared this inner collapse because you endured purification first. You carried confusion without becoming cruel. You faced isolation without becoming manipulative. You lost without corrupting your core. While they avoided accountability, you absorbed it. While they projected, you reflected. While they resisted truth, you integrated it. That process was painful, but it refined you instead of hollowing you out. Karma does not rush. It does not miss. It waits until avoidance is no longer possible, until the mind has nowhere left to hide. And when it settles in, it does not destroy loudly. It dissolves stability from the inside, returning every unprocessed weight to its rightful owner. Point 5. Why you had to release resentment before justice could activate. Karma cannot move cleanly through resentment, because resentment keeps the wound active, and an active wound continues to speak. Anger binds energetic contracts, invisible agreements that say, "This still owns part of me." Obsession delays consequence because attention is currency, and whatever receives your attention remains funded. For a long time, karma circled your situation without landing. not because justice was denied, but because your emotions were still attached to the outcome. The moment you stopped rehearsing conversations in your head, the moment you stopped imagining explanations that would finally make them understand, and the moment you stopped waiting for apologies that would never arrive in the form you deserved, something unlocked. That release did not excuse what happened to you. It did not rewrite the past or soften the truth. It disarmed it. When you no longer needed them to acknowledge the truth no longer needed your defense. This is the point where many chosen ones feel emotionally empty and mistake it for numbness. It is not numbness, it is neutrality. And neutrality is power because it removes resistance. Once you reached that state, karma no longer required your emotional fuel. It could operate independently, without interference, without distortion. Karma does not move through rage, it moves through balance. It does not need you to hate, remember, or explain. It only needs you to release. When you detached, the energetic weight shifted. What was once suspended by your emotional involvement was finally allowed to fall. This is why life often becomes quiet right before karmic consequences unfold elsewhere. You are not being punished with silence, you are being protected by distance. Your calm is not avoidance, it is completion, and completion is the signal that your lesson is over, and theirs is about to begin. Point 6. The internal shift that signals karma is already working. Pay attention to what has changed in you. Your peace is quieter now. Not euphoric, not dramatic, but stable. You are less reactive to disrespect, less tempted to explain, less interested in proving anything. That's not indifference. That is completion. When karma is active, the chosen one stops watching the scoreboard. The need for updates dissolves. You may even feel compassion without attachment. That is the final sign. Because once emotional hooks are gone, justice finalizes itself. The universe does not reward obsession, it rewards detachment paired with integrity. Point 7. Why this protection phase ends with restoration, not revenge. This season does not conclude with confrontation, it concludes with replacement. Not everyone will return, and they are not meant to. What returns instead is alignment. New connections that feel effortless. Opportunities that do not require self-betrayal. Peace that does not depend on external approval. This is why you must not look back. Nostalgia is the final test. The door closed because what was behind it could not exist at your next frequency. And now that karma has touched every enemy, not loudly, not publicly, but precisely, your role is not to celebrate. Your role is to continue forward unburdened. If you feel resonance in this message, anchor it. Comment, "I am chosen." Like this message to confirm alignment. Subscribe not for content, but for continuity. Because this was not a warning. This was confirmation.